Good morning. Welcome on the last gasp of summer out there. It's good to see all these friendly faces. My name is Jean Patterson. I'm a member of the congregation, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody here today to All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. We like to start off by welcoming guests or visitors. So if you brought a guest or if you are a visitor, please stand, tell us your name and where you're from. Yes.
Hi, I'm Rhonda. My husband, Archie Carlson. This is our grandson, Dayton. He hasn't been here for 2 years, but he's back to stay with us.
Well, welcome, Dayton. Glad to see you again. Others? Yes.
My father's Tyler Robinson comes with us today, so he's kind of visiting to check it out.
Okay, great. Tyler, nice to see you. Others? Yes.
We brought our good friends Joshua and Solid, our son and their 3 children, and hanging out.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Welcome. Yes, Kendall.
Well, she's not exactly a visitor or a guest, but our interim minister for this year, Rebecca Gann, is here with us and start with time.
Yes.
I'm Chase. This is my fiance Geraldine. We've been once before, but it's kind of our third time in the last 3 months. So.
Glad you're back. And we would also like to welcome those with us online. Glad everybody's here today. Jack?
My name's Jack Phillips, and I've never done this before. Thank you. It's great to be here. I've had moments when I was hoping for a smaller crowd, but this is great. Thank you all for coming. This is the first time in my life that I will deliver a sermon today, so buckle up. It may, of course, be the last as well. You will see that I am not over-prepared, so you can relax about that. I have been thinking about this for a very long time, and to me, it represents an opportunity to participate in my church. And this is a church that I have grown to love and respect, and so I consider it a great moment. And I hope I don't bring it down. My plan is to preach as though nobody's watching, or maybe that's as though everybody's watching. Like I have never preached before, which is accurate. I'm asking you to listen with grace and generosity. So thank you for that. I'm reminded of a statement, I've forgotten who made it, that a man's reach should exceed his grasp. So consider looking at me that way. Thank you. And now we're going to have the chalice lighting. And this is Tori.
Hello, my name is Tori, and I like this chalice for the respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part of.
Okay, I think you got it. There you go. Now, stand in body and spirit and join us in singing hymn number 374.
is what we are, and what we love we yet shall be. But though may ever shine afar, the will to win it makes us free.
Now, please join me as we affirm the words of our covenant. Goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now we'll sing our children to their classrooms.
May love guide all your ways. Unity be the blessing of your nights and days. Truth on your lips and kindness in your deeds. Faith to follow where the human spirit leads.
And we choose to share our offering this morning with Peaceworks, an organization that we've had a long-standing relationship with. So please, as you think about what the church means to you and what peace might mean to you, please join in giving generously. The offering will now be given and received.
Now there you are. Yes, there's that face that somehow I trust. It may embarrass you to hear me say it, but say it I must. Say it I must. You have the cool, clear eyes of a seeker of wisdom and truth. Yet there's that upturned chin and the grin of impetuous youth. Oh, I believe in you. I believe in you. I hear the sound of good, solid judgment whenever you talk. Yet there's the bold, brave spring of the tiger that quickens your walk. Oh, I believe in you. I believe in you. And when my faith in my fellow man all but falls apart, I've but to feel your hand grasping mine, and I take heart. I take heart to see the cool, clear eyes of a seeker of wisdom and truth. Yet with the slam, bang, tang, reminiscent of gin and vermouth. Oh, I believe in you. I believe in you.
Please join me as we dedicate our offerings to the work of this community. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a compassionate society.
Know thyself. The phrase has serious philosophical pedigree. By Socrates' time, it was chiseled into the forecourt of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Do you aim to accept yourself? Well, you need to know thyself first. Or is it to make good decisions that are right for you? Again, this would be difficult unless you knew thyself. The problem is that none of this is based on a realistic picture of the self and of how we make decisions. You go to the local cafe and you order an espresso. A momentary whim, trying something new. Well, maybe you know that the owner would judge you if you ordered a cappuccino after 11. You laugh, but who hasn't done that? Or are you just an espresso kind of a person? I suspect you do what you do because you think it meshes with the kind of person you think you are. You go to the philosophy section of the bookstore and the fair trade section at the grocer's shop because you are a philosopher who cares about global justice. We all have fairly stable ideas about what kind of people we are and what kind of people we are not. I'm not going to shop at Walmart, fill in the blank, I'm sorry. I'm not that kind of person. There's a deep problem with this mental setup. People change. There are tumultuous periods when we change drastically. In times of romantic love, say, or divorce, or having children. Often we are aware of these changes. After you've had kids, you notice that you're suddenly becoming a morning person. If we change while our self-image remains the same, then there will be a deep abyss between who we are and who we think we are, and this can lead to conflict. To make things worse, we are exceptionally good at dismissing even the possibility that we might change. Psychologists have given this phenomenon a fancy name: the end of history illusion. We all think that who we are now is the finished product. We will be the same in 5, 10, 20 years. But this is completely delusional. Our preferences and values will be very different in the not-so-distant future. This might be okay when it comes to ordering the espresso. Maybe you now slightly prefer cappuccino. But you think of yourself as an espresso kind of a person, so you keep ordering espresso. Not such a big deal, right? But what is true of espresso is true of other values in life, leading to huge differences between what you like and what kind of person you think you are. Hiding. Contradictions between what we like and what we do take significant mental effort, and this leaves very little energy to do anything else. You might be able to know what you think of yourself in this moment, but what you think of yourself is very different from who you are. In a couple of weeks, all this might change anyway. Knowing thyself is an obstacle to acknowledging and making peace with your constantly changing self. If you know thyself to be such and such a kind of person, This limits your freedom considerably. As Andre Gide wrote in Autumn Leaves in 1950, a caterpillar who seeks to know himself would never become a butterfly.
I was wondering what good does it do for me to say what's already up there, but if I'm blind, that doesn't help. Or if I'm hard of hearing, well, I guess you still can't hear. But Don't Believe Everything You Think by Jack Phillips. You like to think you have things figured out. Though often wrong, you rarely are in doubt. Your conclusions and reality are never quite in sync. So don't believe everything you think. Don't believe everything you think. Most of your opinions really stink. To document your wisdom is a waste of ink. So don't believe everything you think. Treat your cognition with great suspicion. Most of your opinions, no, I read that one. No. Treat your cognition with great suspicion. When you think you have a thought, just let it pass. Your synapses have serious lapses. That thought you thought was probably gas. Those who disagree with you are often right. But you don't listen. You get mad and want to fight. You deny all criticism and retaliate for spite. Since you cannot tolerate not being right. That reminds you of anybody in Washington? Your mind is messed up. Have you been drinking? You act like having thoughts is as good as thinking. Please expand your humility and let your ego shrink. And don't believe everything. Don't believe everything. Don't believe everything you think.
What kind of fool am I who never fell in love? It seems that I'm the only one that I have been thinking of. What kind of man is this? An empty shell, a lonely cell in which an empty heart must dwell. What kind of clown am I? What do I know of life? Why can't I cast away this mask of play and live my life? Why can't I fall in love like any other man? And maybe then I'll know what kind of fool I am. What kind of lips are these that lied with every kiss, that whispered empty words of love, that left me alone like this? What kind of eyes are these that could not see what could be seen by everybody else but me? What kind of clown alone am I? What do I know of life? Why can't I cast away this mask of clay and live my life? Why can't I fall in love till I don't give a damn? And maybe then I'll know what kind of fool I am.
Thank you, Tom and Anthony. That was great. I got to pick the songs, or the two that Tom has sung for us today, and I think they did a great job with that. So now here I am before you to preach this sermon, and my topic is the best answers or the best questions. Which would you rather have? Have you brought your favorite questions so that we can all examine them, and or your answers? We could examine those as well. We may get to that later, and maybe not. This is a time you can consider if you're an answer person or a question person. Later we'll get on to my favorites as well, favorite questions and favorite answers, the ones that I hold as most important. Already I can see some of you thinking, it's interesting that I imagine I can see you thinking, but it does look like that to me. And you're saying, silly man, from your opening sentence, you have already tipped your hand. You're asking questions, so clearly you have revealed yourself as a question person. So if that's the way it's all going to wind up, where's the suspense, you know? And my reaction, of course, is that you're a very smart, perceptive congregation, and here I am found out before the end of the first paragraph. What am I supposed to do now? And is this going to be a long morning? Others of you, I see your thoughts as well, and you're thinking, not so fast, because in the context of a question like this, a choice between questions and answers, choosing questions actually constitutes an answer. So, according to that thinking, I am revealed as an answer person. These guys are very fast. I don't know if I can keep up. Truth is, and how about that? How presumptuous, he's already talking about truth. I'll rephrase that. We'll take truth out of it for a minute. The truth is, though, that I like both questions and answers, maybe not exactly equally. I think in the context of this particular topic, I lean a little bit in the direction of questions. And my informal polling says that a lot of members here feel that way as well. I think that the answers I like best are my answers, and I remain pretty suspicious of other people's answers. But the great questions are the great questions, and I think most of us have some respect for that. One thing I notice is that when I engage with a question, when somebody asks a question and I'm right there, I'm more likely to get attentive and interested, and as parts of my mind kind of wake up and go to work on what would it take to find the best answer to that question. Is that a streak of me wanting to show off or just being competitive. I'm not sure where that comes from, but I know that it does happen pretty reliably. I throw myself into the challenge to find the best answer. I compare that to occasions when I already have an answer, or I think I have an answer, and my brain shifts in a different direction. I go into a kind of an idle mode. I may look for an opportunity to share my answer, to show off, to look good if I think I've got a good answer. But already knowing shuts down that part of my brain that was operational before when I was trying to answer a question. I think that's a pretty significant difference that I find when I first look at this. Where would I rather be with the questions or the answers? The questions seem more likely to bring out a kind of spirit of inquiry where there's even a chance that I might learn something. And I think that's a good thing. With an answer, I'm more likely to just shut down. I think that brings me to the point at which a teenager might roll his or her eyes and remarks about it being boring or obvious. And those are the things where we kind of turn off. So what I've seen here is that having an answer is actually a barrier to cognitive engagement. It cuts me off from that condition called the beginner's mind that I so admire when I read the little that I've read about Buddhism on all the great things there, nothingness, emptiness, not knowing, which are very powerful places from which to conduct an inquiry or examine a question. I noticed that there is kind of a scale. It isn't completely, an on-off proposition. There are levels of certainty that I have about particular answers, and I find the more certain I am, the less chance I'm going to learn anything. There's another answer that I want to specifically comment on, and that is the one called I don't know. There are lots of people who hate the answer I don't know. They refuse to use it in their own speaking because they find it embarrassing, like it's an admission of something terrible. Not knowing in our culture doesn't get a lot of support, although clearly there are plenty of people who don't know. Humans have a long-standing preference for avoiding embarrassment, and they tend to avoid acknowledging that they don't know. I think that's often a mistake and leads to poor results. Let me give you an example. Our friend Aristotle. There's at least one famous example where Aristotle didn't know, but he thought that he did, because he told us that heavy objects fall faster than lighter objects. Clearly, he didn't come to this conclusion on the basis of a scientific experiment, because when you do a simple experiment, you'll find that they, within certain close limits, they fall at the same rate. Adjusting, I think, for vacuums and air resistance and such. Fortunately, all of us are much smarter than Aristotle and don't make that mistake. Another example of a question where we think we know, on what was the date when the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence? Well, the answer that everybody knows is the 4th of July, as we celebrate it every year. Knowing that actually gets in the way of ever learning that it was actually adopted on the 2nd of July, and it took them a couple of days to make all the necessary copies so that it could be distributed under the date of July 4th. So this experience of knowing or thinking that we know doesn't always serve us well. Which leads me to wonder, how often has humanity failed to learn or made some other mistake because we thought we already knew? And how many answers have we come up with that are in fact false, that hang around because everybody knows them and nobody questions them? Let me get on to some other questions here. This big area of questions about what things mean. What does anything mean? What does everything mean? As a rule, humans insist that everything must have meaning. Things are supposed to have meaning. I've grown up in that culture, but I have learned to question some aspects of it. I certainly don't see everything as having meaning of equal importance. If people find things large or small that look meaningless, or they're told that certain things are meaningless, they generally react like that's a problem because things are supposed to mean stuff. And if, when they get into it, like I'm an existentialist, so to me, I'm pretty comfortable saying that I see the universe as empty and meaningless. Some people hear that and feel, oh, you must be very lonely, or it must be melancholy. And I don't get that at all. I think the second part of the universe being empty and meaningless is the observation that it is empty and meaningless, that it is empty and meaningless. So don't bring that melancholy meaning into my meaninglessness, okay? So there's actually room in that to be a very happy, optimistic, enthusiastic existentialist. And, you know, if in the past you've tried it and it didn't work for you, well, maybe you could try it again and enjoy this new freedom. We existentialists are not actually trying to deprive humans or the universe of any of its meaning. We just want to keep it straight that the meaning comes from the people, not from the universe. I think that makes a big difference. Next area of questions that I want to address, I want to say a little bit about humor. You'll see that there is some humor in my remarks today, and there are other places where humor is missing. I'm aware of that. I'm somebody who has dabbled in the past with humor as an access to, well, to transformation. You know, I'm interested in how the world could get changed. You know, I can imagine futures with a world very different from the one we know today. And I would be very interested in finding ways that we could get there. The current pace and direction of change doesn't seem to be working the way I would like to see it work. So I've experimented with humor. I created a project that was called Global Transformation Through Funny Songs. And it actually attracted a few followers. But, you know, the tide has not risen very high on that particular project. But the time limits are still, it's still pending. So there's opportunity for people to join and get behind this. My thinking was that humor is one of those events in people's lives. It's an occasion when sometimes we are open to seeing things we haven't seen before. You know, whether you're a Freudian and you know, I've read his essay about jokes, or you just enjoy comedy. A lot of comics are actually kind of philosophers, and we can learn things about ourselves and the universe. And comedy actually makes it a little easier to let in some of those new ideas. Anybody remember Mort Saul? I loved Mort Saul, but he was very professorial, very intellectual, professorial guy, and I got to see the possibility of a close connection there. And so anyway, maybe I'm unconsciously trying to channel Mort Saul, but I'm not. This isn't exactly much of a comedy routine, but maybe the occasional joke. So let me get back to the script here. When people look at this question of who's responsible, the most frequent way we hear people speak that question is looking backwards. They're looking at the past, and they're looking to point fingers. They're generally not passing out awards. So a lot of us learn that responsibility is something to be cagey about, something to be able to avoid. That responsibility often comes with the bad news. You know, there was something bad happened and you're responsible. That's not the kind of responsibility that I would like to talk about today. The different kind of responsibility is responsibility that's looking at the future, and it's statements by people looking at the future who are saying they want to take responsibility. You know, they see the possibility of some new or different future for which they wish to be responsible. They see a difference that could be made, and they want to be part of making that difference. And that's a very different understanding of responsibility than the one that's about fault and blame. So if the channel you're watching is all about fault and blame, it sounds too much like Fox News to me. I would say grab your remote and find some other content, or, you know, write your own stuff. Now, the next big area of questions that I wanted to talk about are the who am I questions. Those are questions that humankind has been ruminating about for a long time. And there are, you know, a large set of answers that people come up with. And it's interesting to see not only their answers, but where they look. You know, who's going to tell me who I am? How is this going to be learned or discovered? Do I listen to Arnold Schwarzenegger suggest that I should find myself in California? I've been to California, and it is pretty nice, but I can tell you right now, that's not where you are. So for today, at least, you're very unlikely to find yourself in California. The whole idea of finding yourself, like the self exists already somewhere, and it's up to you to track it down and grab it, get a hold of it, you know, put it to work, or whatever you want to, however you want to boss yourself around or have control of yourself. There's the reading about knowing thyself is part of this, and the musical question of what kind of fool you are. Of course, I was asking that for myself, and I wasn't suggesting that that would apply to any of you. I think we've already mentioned Socrates, as he's known to us through Plato, who reported back. Plato attended the trial of Socrates just before his death by suicide. And Plato reported things that Socrates said. Some of them have become quite famous, and especially this famous line, the unexamined life is not worth living. Now think about that. That is a very extreme statement of people who are not engaging in introspection, the kind of powerful introspection that Socrates used as a teaching tool. If you're not doing that, kind of sounds like he thinks you shouldn't be alive, like you're wasting your life. Wow, that is harsh. Of course, I probably haven't looked at it seriously enough to have a firm answer. Hey, that's my Socrates joke. Come on, give me. But this idea of introspection, learning who we are, and frankly, the distractions and delusions where we get sidetracked by who we think we are or who we think we're supposed to be. And also, like the whole picture of who we are is supposed to come from. Because there are plenty of people who believe that who you are comes from some other source outside you, that it gets imposed on you, and that you either listen or you don't. You know, like your life, your chance of success, your ability to make a difference depends on how well you're following the orders of someone who determined who you are or who you should be. Now, the rebel in me rankles at that idea. I'm a self-determinist. And so what I would ask is that you consider the possibility that you are the creator of who you are. You get to say. And that actually everyone has maybe has everything to say about who they are. And we tend to, we've not gotten that fully accepted. There are a lot of people who refuse to accept people who say who they are because of views about, well, nobody's supposed to be that, or we think there's some other restraint about who people can be. So we've already mentioned these thoughts about who you consider yourself to be. Do you have an idea of your own persistent self? The first reading mentioned that, and the idea that the self is actually always changing, even though it may be, and the changes may be invisible to us from time to time. But the consensus on this includes not just the neuroscientists, the brain scientists who study this medically and scientifically, but also the experts on Buddhism and mindfulness. They will tell you the self is not one persistent thing that remains the same way through your life. So I think that's liberating. I think you should feel the freedom that's available to you in that. And just because you've never written a book doesn't mean you can't be a novelist. And there's some things that all you have to do is declare them, and you're it. It doesn't depend on proof. When I declared myself to be a writer, I hadn't written any. I certainly hadn't published anything. I had a few things that I wasn't willing to present to other people, but nonetheless, I considered myself to be a writer. And I started finding things to do that were writer-ish. I carried a notebook in my pocket and a pen, and I listened to things differently. And when I heard new ideas or new characters or different people, I started making notes about them with an eye toward, how can I use this in writing? And many of you have gone far beyond my meager accomplishments as a writer, but the point here is not about how far any one of us has gotten as a writer, but the possibility of being something out of your own declaration. Okay? I think that can be very powerful. Some people get distracted by their inner voice, and they think that the inner voice is who they are, I'm pretty clear that my inner voice is not me. And there are plenty of times when I don't follow the advice of my inner voice. Now, you may have your own opinion about what that's gotten me, but I think it's worth being open-minded about that. If you have it that your inner voice is the voice of goodness or conscience or something like that, might not be so. A lot of people have an inner voice that's frankly disempowering, that tells them what a lousy job they're doing or how disappointing they are, how they could have been so much better. Why did they let themselves, whatever. I got fat, among other things. I stopped exercising. There are plenty of things where I can take myself to task and feel disempowered about my life. But that's if I let that voice tell me who I am. And I don't have to listen to that. Clearly, I don't. There's some other things about who I am not. I'm clear that I am not my thoughts. I think I determined that when I was about 15 years old, and it was a great relief because until then, I had some worries that maybe I was going to be a sex criminal. But the relieving insight, the freedom, the liberation is that people are not their thoughts. And even whether you're having bad thoughts or good thoughts or whatever they are, the thoughts are not the things that define you. And there's a lot of having thoughts, in quotes, that passes for thinking. I think that's a significant observation to make, that having thoughts is not thinking. And if you've operated differently on that, you may be giving yourself a little too much credit. So there are definitely places in life for thinking and your own independent thinking, but there's really not any substituting for that just by having thoughts. I'm also not my opinions. I'm not my job. There was a period when I was in college when I identified very closely with a German sports car. But eventually I got it that I was not my car. There's a lot in our culture whose message it is, you are some of these different things. You are the clothes you wear. You are your weight, your shape, your body, your eye color, your hair fashion. There are a lot of things that people want to sell you. They'll tell you that's what you are, and that altering that or replacing it or whatever is what will suddenly make your life work. They're kind of like that voice in your head. I would say, you got to decide for yourself if that's telling you something useful and valuable and empowering, and if it's not, change the channel. That is my advice. Now, a lot of these observations I put them in the general domain of metacognition, which is cognition about cognition, or thinking about thinking. And that's really something that ought to happen more often. I think that's a useful activity. When I wrote my song, Don't Believe Everything You Think, that's a lot of what I was trying to get at. I mean, I wanted to be funny, of course, but I was pointing at something that I thought would be useful to the cause of global transformation. So it was a funny song intended to move toward the goal line there. And although it hasn't happened yet. I got a couple of laughs today, so maybe we're back in the game. But thinking about thinking, it can be useful, and giving some consideration to, there's something I take as true. Is it because I think I know it? Is it because it's my opinion? Is it, do I believe it? Am I taking it on faith? Sometimes it's useful to sort that kind of thing out. It can make a difference on how you're going to manage it and how you're going to be responsible for that. There is I think you can make the case that who you really are, if it's important to say who you are. Well, first of all, there's the question, like, are you really who you are because of the past? Are you here today? Well, there's definitely been a past. There's nobody here today who didn't exist yesterday. So all of us have at least a little bit of a past. Some of us, I'm not sure I want to admit how long my past is at this point. But are you an accumulation of what the past has included for you? For some people, that is not always, they don't always get a powerful, positive answer from that. There are things that happen in people's lives that can be pretty disturbing, and maybe they're hard to forget, and maybe the way we've been managing them is to relive the negative experience every now and again, and we wind up keeping it vividly alive for ourselves, even though that's not really what we would love to have. So, you can make a case about yourself based on all the worst things that have happened to you, or on the things that have happened to you and your worst interpretations of them. This is something I notice in a lot of stand-up comedy routines also. A lot of people, the humor is about telling about these horrible things that they've been through, and how that first date went really badly, or their first marriage went really badly, or whatever it was, telling about. So we have it to a significant extent that what we are is somehow an accumulation of our past. Is that who you want to be? If you could design yourself or a character in your life, or for your child or your grandchild, is that what you would have for them? That you can somehow accumulate all the worst moments of their however many decades of life and lump that all together, and they should know that as determining who they are? Is that just the way it is? I don't buy that anymore. I'm sure I lived a lot of years under that kind of cultural view of how life works, but I don't think life really works that way. I think those were kind of the decisions that I made, the way I heard other people. Other people say that, well, if your family's had a divorce, then that's it. That's terrible. You're never going to be happy again. It's going to be awful. Your parents will hate each other forever, and you will. No, it doesn't have to be that way. I know of lots of exceptions to that, and I'm not trying to invalidate the people who've had difficult divorces or had to deal with people who were irresponsible or immature. That could be frustrating, and it can go on for a long, long time. But it still doesn't have to, the significance you give it, what you make it mean. The point is, you really are the ones you're the person who gets to have a say about what that means in your life. So you might consider you don't really have to change what happened. Maybe what there is to do is to stop telling the same story about it. I had a story like that about my parents' divorce, and that my dad was a bad guy. and that he had treated my mom really badly and treated me really badly, and that he was a villain. And finally, when I was, 40 years old or something, I took an independent look at that, what was actually happening all those times. And it was like, he was doing everything he could to stay in touch with me, to contribute to me, to send me money, send me cards, remember my birthday, remember me at holidays. And I was cashing his checks and throwing the cards away because I was clinging to my loyalty to my mother meant that I had to cling to this story that he had been such a bad guy. Well, I don't really know how bad he was at his worst. I was just a kid. But over all the years, the main thing that he was doing was trying to stay connected with me. And when I finally got that, it was a huge opening for me to get back in touch with my dad and just, see who he was. And I had 3 little boys. He didn't know I even had kids. So we had a family reunion that was unexpected and pretty delightful. So I'm grateful that I gave up the old story I had about who I was and took my own look. One of the points that I mentioned in there, that's what makes the difference, is not so much what happened to you, but what you make it mean. And sometimes that's hard to get. A lot of people are so attached to what they have made things mean in their lives. They don't have much freedom to letting that go or taking a fresh look at it. But it can be very powerful. And I think there's a great likelihood that the things you hold as the worst things in your life may not have been quite as bad as what you remember them. I don't mean to be making light of it. I'm just saying there's very often room for improvement, and you're really the only one who can do that. I can tell you your life ain't so bad, but you're not going to take my word for it. You got to dig in there and discover it for yourself, or whatever there is to be discovered. I don't want to let too much more time pass without mentioning. We got to talk about some answers too. We've been talking too much about questions and not so much about answers. There have been many fascinating, powerful, wonderful answers that humanity has come with up over the centuries. My favorite is yes, and maybe hell yes, and more please. Those are great answers. The biggest problem with answers is that if all you know is the answer, there's too much that you don't know. You need to know the question that answer has been applied to and where people have found that to be a good answer. What do people get out of that answer in a particular context? I get very impatient. I'm kind of an impatient guy. For all the time I'm taking, I still get to be impatient. And I wish that there was some way that we could just, stop spending so much time on the answers from the past. A lot of them are not reliable. Let's just get a new page and let's start expanding the human book of knowledge with some new answers. And let's not worry so much about however many pages we've got and get on to some new stuff. Unfortunately, it appears that generations and individuals it just doesn't work unless we engage with these questions individually or to do it ourselves and to come up with either confirming the same answer or finding a new one. So you can't just ratify everything that's already been done and go on. You kind of need to take the time to go back through it and grapple with it yourself. I was going to say a few words about language. if you don't appreciate the importance of language, I suggest you read some George Lakoff and some Noam Chomsky. Those guys know the huge impact that language has on, or linguistics as they would call it, upon politics and policy and many things. A couple other things I want to quickly mention. The way we express ourselves about love. Very important topic. I love you so much. I want us to spend the rest of our lives with you making me happy. Kind of the difference, you know, what we say and then how we live life about it. So I also would say this about love, that if love for you is primarily a feeling, I worry that you may have built your castle on the sand. Because feelings are wonderful, but they're not usually very stable. Do you have reliable control over your feelings, that you're willing to risk what you love on that kind of basis? What if the day comes and the feeling is not the same? If love for you is primarily a commitment, and you're someone who is able to manage the persistence of a commitment, whether the feeling is there every day or not, then you're in a completely different place, and it can be much more powerful. I'm not going to talk about either one of my marriages. That's a no-win. No, I'm sorry. I could, but in the interest of time, my lovely wife is here in the fourth row. Another thing we do about love is we describe great relationships of full equality and full commitment, and we ascribe a quantitative description, which is 50-50. Why not 100-100? I think we're cutting ourselves, we're shorting ourselves. We're shorting our partners. 50-50 may be the way you share the profits with your business partner, but it's not a good description for a loving, presumably lifetime relationship. So I have gone to 100-100, and I recommend it. There are a few other things about language that bug me, but we don't have time to examine all of those. Maybe this one. When we speak of hope, I love hope. I'm not asking anybody to give up hope, okay? I'm asking you, can you upgrade your hope to possibility? I find the word possibility to be rich with a lot of meaning and to be a lot closer to action. So when I'm feeling like nothing left but hope or discouraged in some way that I might talk about hope, I look to see if there's room for me to talk instead with the word possibility, and maybe even to develop a possibility about how I can deal with whatever this discouraging situation might be. Workability is a useful concept that in many, many cases the term workability can replace good and bad. Many times, I'm not saying there's no such thing as good or no such thing as bad, but many times it's much more effective to be able to speak in terms of what works than what your opinion is about what's bad or what's good. So, and there's some things that, our plan for mutually assured destruction, is that good? Well, no, I hope we never consider it to be good. But on the other hand, we might want it to be workable. So anyway, whatever that gives you. There's an observation I ran across that I use when I'm dealing with conflict. And I think it's too important not to share, and it's this, that it's trying to account for the huge disparities in views that exist among people. And it's what it says is this: the way people think and speak and act correlates 100% with how the world occurs for them. So, and I think that is largely accurate. People that disagree with you, even on things that you consider unthinkable or unimaginable, very few of them are, almost always, they're simply operating out of their own view of what the world is and how the world works. They're not doing it out of pure evil. You know, they're not trying to imagine what is the worst way to sabotage the planet Earth and the species called humanity. They're acting out of some way that they see the world. And I think it's important that we go beyond just being angry with the people that we disagree with. Unfortunately, there are way more people that I disagree with than I ever would have imagined. But and some of them are pretty outspoken, and we fall into these games of trying to outrage each other. I think we got to get beyond that. We got to find some ways to talk to one another. And this observation that people operate consistent with the way the world occurs for them, not necessarily the way the world is or what's true or what's good or what's bad, but the way the world occurs from them, might give us some insight or even empathy for the people who just haven't got it yet, you know? So anyway, that's I've already attacked hope, as you recall. Next, I want to attack understanding. I think there's a case that can be made that understanding is not the answer. On many topics, we speak of understanding like once the world gets educated, once we improve our understanding of each other and our problems, then we'll be able to get to powerful solutions. Then the world will be, the problems will be solved. What's missing with understanding? Well, if I understand diet and exercise, will that make me skinny? I think I do understand diet and exercise, and I remain unskinny. So what's going on? There's something else that's missing here. Well, let me cut to the bottom line. I think one of the things that's missing is access to being. Westerners have this big, our focus is on, sometimes it's on knowing and understanding, or it's on doing. You know, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and then you can become skinny. A Buddhist, I think, would tell us that we should look at who we are being in the matter of our own health and our own diet and nutrition. So, something to consider. And my intention today overall was to make some points about being and about transformation, the possibility of possibility, the ways that we can improve ourselves and that the way we listen to one another and what's possible on our planet. So what I was all planning to lead up to was something like this, where I would actually leave you with a possibility. I'm interested in possibilities for this church. And so one of the possibilities that occurs to me that I would like to share with you and see if, how it sounds. Is it something that other people would want to support, or is it, I don't know, maybe not. In some respects, you won't hear completely new things. You'll hear about what we've already got, okay? But maybe just putting it, slightly changing the way we relate to it and ways that we can share it powerfully with others. For example, if we commit ourselves to being a church with the best questions, not necessarily a church that claims it has all the answers already, but a church that has the best questions. To me, that's like an irresistible possibility. You could not get me out of this place if I knew it that way. So here's what I was going to tell you, is that these possibilities are sometimes stated in the framework of a declaration about who one is, okay? Because that's a very powerful kind of a statement. You say, who I am is this possibility. So it was going to go like this. Who I am is the possibility of a church where members govern themselves with democratic principles and where they examine questions on matters that they regard as important and take actions to transform themselves and their communities, their society, and the world. So I've set the bar pretty high for the church, but that's what I wanted to declare. Thank you very much.
Maybe we'll finally see, even to
Thank you all so much for being here today. You have been gracious and generous. And I do have one other message for you, which is that this Friday there are some major activities for a cause called Clean Missouri. Mary Lindsay is going to be out in the lobby. She can give you information and she can collect your name and help you find to set up a carpool or ride a bus so that you can be part of the movement for this important and worthy cause. Thank you very much.
The heart's a religion, which like sunshine goes everywhere. Its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love.
We're